Our guest today is Micael Lawson. He's the CEO of Sweden's Recas. That's an engineering company with real expertise in design, production, automation, digitalization. We asked Micael on the show to help address the manufacturing challenges and opportunities that Ukrainian companies face.
And it's worth mentioning that Micael has his finger on the pulse in Ukraine and a pretty solid understanding of advanced manufacturing principles and practices. So we are really looking forward to his perspective.
As always, I'm Jonathan Winch of Cylinder Defense in Copenhagen.
And I'm Dan Kucherenko from Serhiy Pritula Charity Foundation in Kyiv, Ukraine.
And I'm Micael Lawson, CEO of Recas Sweden. Happy to be here.
Welcome to the show.
Micael, can you please briefly introduce yourself and your company?
Well, briefly, we're a automotive company that I founded in 2012 after Saab Automobile went into bankruptcy. And the company I started with as a 19-year-old boy after leaving the military service, and where I spent my time within production, moving over to product development as a mechanical engineer. And we're a company that are quite solid into how to produce and to product develop in an efficient manner.
Wow, amazing. So did I get it right that your company started from some part of Saab manufacturing?
Well, Saab went into bankruptcy, and then I started the company up in Norway, in Oslo, as a matter of fact, and started taking over automobile industry knowledge of being globally effective into a quite rigid industry that oil and gas is. And that was the start of it.
Just for listeners who might be listening with half an ear, when you said Saab went into bankruptcy, Saab's alive and well. We're going to have plenty of Gripens, no problem at all. That was back then. That was a part of Saab. Yeah. So Dan and I actually met you, mostly me, met you in Kyiv earlier this month. What's your personal connection to Ukraine? And how did it come about?
I was actually asked by the local Swedish community leader to give a donation to the city of Fastiv, a city that we have a friendship relationship with our city, Trollhattan, which I'm residing in. And it was to purchase and donate some generators. And after this round was completed, they asked, well, how are we going to get them over to Ukraine? And I just raised my hand and said, I'll drive them over. And that was a bit rash, perhaps, but that was my first visit ever to Ukraine. And it gave me an interest of the people I met. And I went over once again for the Brave One event, where I met a couple of soldiers whom I asked if I could support them in any way. And they said, well, our basic need is to help us save the lives of our soldiers. And that moved me a lot. And ever since then, we've been very devoted to, in some way, shape or form, be able to support.
Amazing story. Thanks for this move. I know that many people are thinking about Ukraine and worry about Ukraine, but not every one of them are ready to come here and to put themselves into a risky situation and provide the real action for supporting Ukraine. And that is extremely important because we are fighting with Russian aggression for 4 years. And when we see that people from abroad help us and support us, we feel that we are not alone. So that's very important. Thank you very much. And I'm curious, when you were in Kyiv, what probably surprised you most about how Ukrainian industry has adapted under this wartime condition?
Well, I've been traveling around in different cities and meeting different factories from Lviv to Kramatorsk. And I think the one common thing is that everybody share a joint mission and a goal, victory to Ukraine. This might sound very obvious, but it gives a different climate of cooperation, and it's increasing efficiency in your market, and it's a really nice feeling to be part of.
So Ukrainian companies, the defense companies, are producing under conditions that no European automotive or engineering company has ever faced. Air raid interruptions, supply chain destruction, constant demand changes backwards and forwards. So from a pure manufacturing process standpoint, because I understand you have a lot of knowledge in that sector, what are they actually doing well that the West tends to underestimate?
Well, the disruptions mentioned are something that Europe isn't prepared for. There is an immature understanding what being in war is like. Kids needs to go to school, society needs to function. Supply chains is what Europe have today. The defense industry hasn't been under even a market pressure and has less safety than, for example, global industries such as the automotive industry, where the example not having redundant supply nets instead of chains for critical components would be cause of firing responsible person.
One of the things when we met, you talked about your understanding of and having worked within automotive industry contexts, and it would actually be good to get a feeling for what is your background there, what's your expertise.
Well, I would say I started in the production facilities as a blue-collar worker building cars, and I spent there a few years learning the how to optimize production in regards of standing with a timepiece, taking clock how many seconds does each ever set and tempo take. So that gives you an understanding on how to be totally efficient with every second. And going on from there, I went into mechanical engineering and moved over to product development. So I've seen both sides of just doing the product development and entering in it into efficient production. I believe the evolution cycle we've seen in the last 4 years in Ukraine that is very impressive. It's nothing we can look back on and see that this is what it can do in the future. It needs to continue accelerating. So if we move back to industry, we would say that we started with manual labor, then we went over to production lines, and then we went over to partially automation. And I think it's the knowledge to understand where to apply it and where to not. Where does it make sense? And sometimes it doesn't make sense.
And where do you think are the gaps? If you had to name the 2 or 3 manufacturing disciplines where Ukraine firms urgently need to level up, what would that be?
I think it is to accelerate production capacities, cut piece price by industrialization, and capture process data and IP digitally. These are 3 core steps that needs to be taken.
I've always been a little bit interested in this idea of manufacturing. How do we manufacture at scale? Because I very much accept the argumentation that it doesn't matter what you've got in stockpiles. We really need this ability to have a defense industrial base that can do surges, that can scale up very fast. And we don't really have that in place now. So it's quite fascinating. But I think it was interesting to hear how much emphasis you put on data. And for people who are not manufacturing people, can you just put this perspective in this? Why is data at the center of advanced manufacturing now?
Well, I think no one has missed all the talks about AI and machine learning, and that is the future and the step that is the next evolution. But speaking of that, that's just the tip of the iceberg. If you don't have controlled data to work with and put into your agents in different shapes and form and are being able to filter it, it's of no use. So this is just a hygienic level you need to come to have a total efficiency.
So you're kind of only as good as your data to some degree.
Yes, that's true.
You spent decades obsessing, I guess, over lean production, which you described before, just-in-time, quality systems, supplier tiering, things like that. Which of those lessons translate sort of directly to defense manufacturing in a wartime economy, and which ones aren't so applicable?
Well, I believe the core value is to avoid waste and to increase efficiency. And that journey never ends. It's continuous improvement. You are never done to be better. So how can you produce in the right time, at the right quality, to the right cost? This is the continuous question you always need to ask yourself. So it's about taking the data from the head of our heroes and making it digital so we can scale it. Automotive has the experience of cross-functional development teams and production over the globe. For example, how can you give 10 technicians the front development power of 100? How can you duplicate factories?
So, what have you seen some of these challenges? Do you have any anecdotes you can tell us about challenges you've seen when you've been talking with Ukrainian manufacturers?
I've met a lot of very interesting and devoted people, no doubt about that. But if there's something that I think could be perhaps improved, is that I see almost everything is product developed to create an ability. I lack what I see that you have product development that are using design for assembly and design for manufacturing from the first steps.
So ideally, you should be thinking that in from product development. All the product development steps is how not only what capability does it deliver to the operational scenarios, but also how can we make this product in such a way that we can scale it easily and maybe also address supply chain issues. That side of supply chain is a particular challenge for anybody, of course, in today's world, but it's also a problem for Ukrainian manufacturers who aren't used to dealing with trying to smooth out a supply chain that is as difficult, also given the speed of iteration in product development. So what would you recommend to manufacturers as ways of addressing these issues?
But it's simple. This is the solution to avoid inefficiency of bad data control. You need to have perhaps a digital twin. You need to have the understanding that you need to go away from supply chains, because if you break one link, it fails. You need to go over to supply nets and have the redundancy. And I mean, it's easy to sit here on a podcast and being judgmental, and please do not take it this way. But it is the ability to have perhaps the resources to be redundant. And sometimes time takes the decision, and I have full respect for that. But it also perhaps creates weaknesses in not having dual sourcing. And if you can address dual sourcing and you have a digital twin, so you're able to have a support side that can do this for you, then when a supply link fails, you have a solution for it.
Can you imagine that you are starting a venture of a production of military production for your army, for example, and you need to be very fast and you don't have time to build these complex systems right away, but you understand, with all your understanding of product lifecycle management, what will be your first steps?
If I don't have time to do anything than to just rush something up, I would rush something up for sure, because supplying something is better than supplying nothing.
The war is ongoing for 4 years, so we understand that we have to also plan our future.
Yes, and I think if we were to look at statistics where we have failed products coming out to the front line and seeing what they cause, this is, of course, something that we want to take away. We talked earlier about avoiding waste, and this is quality and avoiding waste. So to put it simple, it is the solution of controlling your data and allowing one data lake between product development, production, and let's call it aftermarket. When we talk about working in silos and we lose efficiency, this is the solution to go forward. This is the setup that all global companies are working with: product development and production, and how to handle the processes so you are able to repeat the success of a few heroes. Another important point to all the companies out there who want to become global, that is also a great way of creating the value in your company and not letting it stay in the head of your employees. So we set this up for different defense companies to create structure and increase efficiency. But it's also how to get your fault reports back so you can become better where you have the waste.
If we imagine that, for example, that's the real situation in Ukraine, where we have thousands of startups. We don't have corporations like Saab or other automobiles. So everyone is producing some MVP. They tested it with the soldiers, with the people of Ukraine, understand that this is this product that are needed right now. They need to produce it not tens, but thousands a month. And in this situation, how would you start this manufacturing? Like, would you apply that data collection at the first point, like from the very beginning, and put the data analysis?
Okay, well, I'd say you have to look at it by case by case. There is not one answer that is true for all different cases. So, I mean, say that you're sitting cutting small metal pieces, so you're going to have scrap metal. You don't have to have a digital twin there. But say that you're producing perhaps drones and you want to be able to duplicate this, then I'd say a digital twin is essential. And if you start doing this, then you have the ability to duplicate and scale up. So let's say where you have products that need scalability, that is good to create a digital twin within a PLM system. And the earlier you do this, the less work it is, and the more control you always keep over your data.
Can you make it really clear for us what having a digital twin enables you to do?
Well, for example, when we build factories or move factories, or then we need to understand all the IP, all the data values. So say the drawing, the 3D model, the processes that are required, and perhaps the tests that are being performed. And if we were to have, for example, a fault report from field, we would do the root cause analysis and go back to the digital twin, being able to make a root cause solution so you don't repeat the mistake. For example, if you have, say, an electric motor that is no longer available, you would be able to have a 3D model, check it out, and be able to see, okay, this is the next solution and that works. And that could be much quicker than that you then order it, take it into workshop, test it. So it's all about how to increase speed. And in the case that it doesn't increase speed, then it's the wrong solution to go to.
So you, on the one hand, of course, your company does a lot of, as I understand it, advising companies who want to establish a manufacturing base or expand their manufacturing base or improve the way they manufacture, but Ukraine related. So can you tell us a little bit about Rufus, which I understand is an unmanned ground vehicle, a UGV, where you developed that with direct input from Ukrainian end users, right? So, yeah, tell us about Rufus, would you?
Well, it all started when I met the team at Bray One. It was the guys I asked how could I support me, and as I said, the response blew me away. I've been working against engineering problems that are small in the past, but help us keep our guys alive. It was a powerful message. And right now there's a huge lack of UGVs at the front line, and we've got more operators than we've got available equipment. So we started having these volunteering meetings and understood that we have today some systems that are very expensive. And I think the first requirement give us 10 for the price of one. So we've done like kind of an IKEA solution based on requirements from the front line. So how can you mass produce cheaper than we're currently building it manually in Ukraine today? And from also the foreign countries are the most expensive solutions, I'd say.
So Sweden gave us IKEA, and IKEA is sort of it's embodies this idea of designing products that are built to scale, that are sharing components, that are sharing platforms, and I think that's gone through the entire world. So Rufus, your UGV, is also built with those kind of principles in mind.
Yes, for sure. So I mean, the size of Rufus is how to have minimum waste of a standard alumina sheet. It is every engineering step is based on the time it takes to assemble it, and how to keep piece price down. So yes, it's IKEA copy, you perhaps could say.
You make the statement that elsewhere that that was developed through dialogue with Ukrainian end users. What does that actually mean in practice? How did that happen?
In practice, it started off with, I'd say the first engineering challenge was how the UGV laboratories could be safeguarded working places. So we did then design the shelters that are to be transportable and possible to dig down, being subsurface with concrete layers, sandwich layers to be safeguarded. Unfortunately, we were never able to finance these into being a donation over to Ukraine as we intended, but we still have the setup for it. And then it came out the UGV need, and that was what we then set off. So we had on Sundays, we had voluntary work from the office where we had dialogue with the end user getting in requirements. And then during the week, we just developed it. And we had once a week, we just set off to show progress and continue the dialogue.
So when you went over to Ukraine and you met Dan, close your ears, but the wonderful Ukrainian people, and you experienced that, and you wanted to help, as many of us have gone that same journey. When you came back to your team in Sweden, have they spent time in Ukraine? How does that work? Because you said there was a lot of voluntary work done.
People want to support, but if you haven't come over to Ukraine, it's really hard for being born and raised in a peaceful country that never experienced war to understand what it's like. So there's a big misconception, and it's really hard. And I never think you can explain to someone who hasn't gone over. But our team has been very happy to help. We have, for example, a karma day every year here that people can take out to do good in society and try to create something greater than yourself, and it needs to be totally selfless. So the team is already on the page of being a supportive team, so they had no problems on jumping in and doing this work.
Yeah, and we all know that while we support Ukraine, we are supporting ourselves. We are supporting the rest of Europe and the safety for everybody. So, so that co-development aspect, how do you structure that kind of co-development loop across a war zone?
Well, I think it wasn't a problem at all because we are a product developing company. So given requirements from Ukraine was not different from having requirements from any other project. And working globally is something that we've always been doing. So having a contact with Ukrainian users was like having every other meeting, except that there's air alerts and there's being out in the field or running meetings from cars going from town to town.
And perhaps at a speed and prioritization that differs a little bit from what we're used to in the rest of Europe.
And there's always time for a meeting when you talk with Ukrainians. It doesn't matter if it's Saturday, Sunday, late at night or anything. And
I find it's amazing how you can meet someone like we did with Micael Lawson, for example, right? He's from the Azov Brigade. Dan and I meet him Thursday night and say, we're doing some recordings in Kiev. Can you come and be a guest? We've got a slot tomorrow. And he gives us 3 hours in the morning there, the very next morning. That is close to unheard of in many European countries. That sort of flexibility. And it's not just Micael, it's a general way of working somehow.
Your core pillar is rapid scalability, as it was mentioned. And that sounds very, very sweet, right? But how does it actually works, and what is your, for example, requirements of supplier collaboration before you can honestly say that the manufacture and the production is scalable?
Well, I think there's always the need you have to take in account. You never have scalability to the stars. So we need the digital twin, as I said before, the PLM, where we capture the production processes, the 2D and 3D data. That's important. We start with we already build production lines and duplicate factories for different industries, so it's nothing new to understand how you do the scalability. But for the suppliers, as you say, then you go in and you look at the suppliers, what are their capacities, and sometimes you need to go to a supplier and see if you can help them increase their capacity. And also using dual sourcing is a valuable tool to be able to have production capacities from two sources.
That what I was going to ask actually about sourcing and supply chains. It looks like you has to not always improve your production capabilities, but also look for another type of suppliers and trying to get the best deal on the market and trying to find the best producer of components that you are using for production. Am I correct?
Yes, it's of course you could try to say that it is some sort of teamwork, understanding that you always have double suppliers. But say for the automobile industry, you sometimes have like 70-30 split on your sub-suppliers. So you have two suppliers supplying the same part, and you have the quantity at 70% of the best cost piece price, and to the other supplier you still maintain 30%, so they still have the capability. Here is a typical way of also pressing piece price, but it's also availability of increasing both up to 100%.
Micael, you embody to some degree more than other guests we've had on the show, you embody this idea of efficient manufacturing. Your answers are very sort of clear, direct on the question. If it doesn't require more than that, you don't give it more than that. And I think that's it's just like we're experiencing a manufacturing facility in a person right here.
But we are so curious, to dig deeper.
Fire on with the questions.
In defense procurement, we're used to decades-long development cycles, and you're an automotive-paced engineering company, and I know that it's you don't just come up with a car in January and deliver it in December. There's a long period as well of development. But how do you protect the speed advantage of the automotive industry with quite complex, you could say exquisite technologies? A car is sort of a complex system, without cutting corners on the things that matter in a fielded system, because there's a lot that matters in defense, and you've got life and death, right? Work. So how do you balance that, going down into the depths of everything you can try and nail down and say this is going to work perfectly, up against the speed requirement?
Yeah, well, for sure, it's a challenge that shouldn't say it's just one straight answer, but I think the world has a lot to learn from Ukraine today. So, for example, in Sweden, we have the law about transparent purchasing from the MOD, which has cycles that would never work in Ukraine needs today. The Swedish industries could not work this way either, but still managed to take in quotes to be price and time efficient without entering into corruption. And corruption is a cancer that we all should avoid in the industry. So I think a prime example is Brave One. I think where you need from order to delivery be within about 10 days. This is amazingly performed. So how we have treated our UGV Rufus is that we have the dual sourcing from start on all components. And that lets us to be flexible to adapt in design and production even before we have the hardware. We call it a development platform that is designed to be continuous developed, so you can determine the interfaces in the architecture and that they can be adapted, and that is key.
There could be some really good learnings there for the many UGV companies that now need to produce the much higher level. So
And we have
obviously,
240 UGV producers in Ukraine.
yeah, and they've all had different starts and they're all at different levels, but I'm sure they could all benefit from some of the principles here while they're trying to figure it out on their own, many of them.
What you're saying there, Jonathan, is that our production roof right now, without raising up the dual sourcing, we're at 80,000. So working in this shape and form is something that could be a good example to the many UGV manufacturers to try to duplicate, to have this ability to give Ukraine the need they have.
Yeah. So let's just talk about cluster manufacturing for a moment. Cluster manufacturing is a concept you've applied in the Swedish context. You know, we're distributing production across multiple modes, and so no single point of failure that can kill the whole line, right? And to some degree, that's already an upsec model in Ukraine with distributed productions to avoid any one attack on one facility to destroy everything. But what would it take to bring cluster manufacturing as a more complete concept to a fully professional level in Ukraine?
Well, we believe that Ukraine is really great at cluster manufacturing. So spreading risk and capability in different locations, this is the A game of Ukraine today. And I mean, again, into the risk of repeating myself, but uh, how to create the recipe to allow others to recreate the successful production. Again, it's the digital twin. So you have a few heroes that know how to do this, but look into Ukraine and the mass population you have there. There's many people, I would suppose, that even wants to support even more, but don't really know how. So how can you share the recipe? So share the recipe, that's the key for scale.
And that's
That's
something that you want to be able to do as well to help them design that recipe. Is that right?
Yes, yes, for sure. And there's many others that know this as well, but we do assist in this. Yes.
I can't quite fully agree with the digital twin as a model that solve everything or help to solve the scaling and manufacturing problem. Why? Because in the beginning of the war, we as Ukrainian society get the digital twin and the blueprint of FPV drone. So everyone could produce FPV drone on their kitchen, on their garage, on the field, whenever they want, right? So we had like 1,000 different producers of FPVs, and the quality of these drones were sometimes were terrible and were even dangerous to deliver to our soldiers. So the problem of digital twin doesn't solve the problem of component combining and the final quality of the product. So you still has to control this process and improve it constantly. So it's interesting that you mentioned about digital twin, and that sounds very important, but how you can combine it with this process of controlling the quality, probably in the same way that you create this digital twin?
Yeah, so I mean, digital twin is a word. It is just how do you create your grandmother's favorite recipe? You need to do it this exact same way. So that is what digital twin is. So in the fact of that you have quality issues, then you haven't reproduced the successful recipe in the right way. You're missing some ingredients. So how do you add this process control that should have been added or needed to be added from learnings from the continuous improvement?
And you probably have to adapt somehow, because if you create a digital twin which rely on some kind of type of component from some specific supplier, and you cannot access this supplier in other region or in other part of the country or in other, I don't know, climate zone, then your digital twin won't work exactly in the same way.
Yes, and here comes communication as a really strong bearer. So when you have field quality issues, you need to have them reported back. And you need to do the root cause analysis. You can go in and do an interim change, perhaps add an extra process step that from the production facility that you check for this not being a fault. And during meantime, you need to work to find the root cause and eliminate the root cause.
Now, it's not like Ukraine came from, I don't know, being an agricultural society to suddenly in 2014 saying, okay, let's get doing some manufacturing, right? Because you could get that impression maybe. Ukraine was already a major manufacturer for Russia's arsenal. I think it was about 40% of all the Russian weaponry and so on was created in Ukraine. So there's obviously a lot of manufacturing knowledge. There are not enough advisors in relation to how many companies could benefit from the kind of things that you're talking about and that you're able to communicate, Michael. Mika.
Yeah, but I think you're saying something great there, Jonathan, that there is fantastic people who know how to do this, but how to spread the knowledge is the question. And you can't, unfortunately, Xerox and copy these people. You need to take it out to new people and share that knowledge. So, I mean, that's the full question. How do you share the knowledge?
Yeah. And that's what Defense Forward, the podcast here, is a lot about. It's just an entry point. It's not like we're sharing the full recipes and things, but it's an entry point for sharing knowledge, because I agree that's super important.
Michael, what if we would ask you to answer the questions from our viewers on, for example, YouTube comment section? Could you provide them some feedback in a week or two after publication so people get your personal feedback and perspective on their problem regarding the manufacturers in Ukraine?
Yes, of course. I'd love to.
Perfect.
Let me turn the conversation for a moment to automation and robotics, right? So those are central to your working at Recas and at Sweden. So Sweden has pretty good resources, pretty good talent pool. I know it's under pressure like anywhere is, but when you take Ukraine, you've got labor being very scarce. It is extraordinarily motivated. But how do you make the case for automation for Ukraine? Are there some areas where human craft and flexibility will always beat the robot, will always be necessary in manufacturing?
Yes. I mean, I think the knowledge is to understand when to automate and when not to. And it goes to the ecosystem that you're working within. So it goes down to the three pillars of cost, time, and quality.
Right. In some businesses, I'm thinking about, for example, the advertising business, they always say the client can ask for the low cost or high quality or low price, but you can never get all three things at once. But the automotive industry has always been focused on trying to deliver those three pillars at once. And that's what we need to do for the Ukraine battlefield as well.
Yes, and something about this is being able to produce in scale and being able to produce repetitive. This is something that truly do cut costs, but it comes in a long chain. It comes also in the availability of getting the orders for the different producers you have in Ukraine, and it's a global issue. So if you're able to do the investments needed to cut piece price, you should do this joint together with the government or the MOD or whomever are the ones that are requesting you to produce higher volumes, higher quality, and to lower cost. Yeah. I have something I strongly believe in that is not part of this interview, but well, it is sort of. But you have the rapid evolution that has been in 4 years' time, and that needs to accelerate to have a new evolution cycle for 2 years' time, or at least faster than it's been before. So the development has never been as fast as it is today, but it will never ever be as slow as it is today. It will continue to accelerate. So when you look at the dark factories that we're working with, that is taking down the people within the company and increasing the automation fully within the company. And this
So,
is same.
so just for a moment, they're dark factories, referring to factories where there are no or virtually no employees, and that factory is not lit even because there's no humans in the facilities.
And this is what we see also in the front line, that we are decreasing the number of people, or we're increasing the number of unmanned vehicles, and the autonomous ladder will continue to higher degrees, where you will be having vehicles or that can take their own decisions. So the battlefield on the front line today is highly dependent on how you can recruit people. But as time goes, it's starting to shift to production capacity. And this is why I burn so highly for this. So you need to understand that in the future, it's going to be which player is going to be able to set the most pieces of the puzzle to the front line, to low cost, to high quality, and to high intelligence.
Ideally, the defense industrial manufacturing system should reflect the battlefield closely. And that makes me think of the fact that we talk about dark factories. Perhaps we should be talking about dark battlefields in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. I see it as an economical arm wrestle at the front line. And the production capacity, what we see that is the piece price of components or of total systems in Ukraine now, that is low and it's cheap, and it's a lot of due to labor cost. But I know that in high volumes, the production of Rufus, for example, that will be lower than the cost of manual labor out of Ukraine. And this is nothing that has to be, this is just exemplified. But having that production facility in Ukraine, doing it in that manner, that would increase volume, that would lower the piece price, and it would take away people from doing that, and it would free resources to doing something else that really matters.
But this automation of manufacturing costs a lot of money, right?
No, not in this sense. So I mean, in regard of adding then design for manufacturing and design for assembly, that is just a smarter way of doing the product development. So you add two layers to it. So in regards of what I said previously, that it's only a product development for creating a ability, but you do not product develop to do the optimal assembly, to cut the cost and cut the time. And this is what global industry, this is where you look at IKEA and you think of, well, this is smart that I have a flat package and it contains everything I need.
Yeah.
So that revolutionized the business. And if you look at Russia as the enemy today, but you think of perhaps China's production capacity, if Russia would have had the Chinese production capacity and the efficiency, that is a terrible scenario.
Yeah, it is.
So today they have the dark factory that produces the Xiaomi cell phone without one single employee. So imagine such a factory producing UGVs or UAVs or whatever it is.
In these terms, we have to learn from China.
But we know a lot already. The first steps that we're talking about here today, but this is what we want to evolve into.
Yeah. And thank God people like you are there to try and push that agenda and to bring some of the expertise.
And you guys to echo it out so others can duplicate and replicate, also seeing the same mission.
Yeah.
It sounds like a perfect scenario. I would love to have such manufacturers in Ukraine to produce in a high volume, in a cheap price, and with less people on a facility, which makes it more safer for people.
I think maybe the strategy haven't been able to do this, but if you were to take a governmental view on Ukraine and you were to determine that these were to be dedicated high volumes, and these guys don't be in collaboration or move your product out in another direction. So we can have high volume and then we can have low cost. So we have, for example, that we cut piece price. If we go from 50 to 10,000, we cut piece price with 82%.
What?
Yeah.
Yes,
82?
82%. These are figures that we have sent to the Swedish MOD, and we're in dialogue right now. So this is the level. So by high volume production, you can't do labor production and do it cheaper.
We don't have enough people in Ukraine for labor production.
No, but I think this is why it's so interesting to not be buying systems that are in legacy manufacturers from Europe that costs a handful of 100,000 euros. You should be able to have this efficiency because the money is limited.
For sure.
These are really strong messages really here for the future. We're basically saying that the one who masters volume is able to bring the costs down very, very significantly, which
Yes.
then enables you to create more volume. We can't keep doing it the old way. So Ukraine needs to adopt these, and actually the earlier they can start thinking it, start making early steps, the better.
Yes, that's true. That's the future.
That's mind-blowing how cheap can be the item if you increase the volume by 10 times.
Yes, but that's what you see. I mean, if you go into perhaps China or something else and you start looking at what is the production cost of doing something, that is low, but you will never find like manual labor low volume when you have these amazing prices.
I would also ask about some lessons learned from Sweden Cold War, and you had this dispersed airbase strategy for resilient industry networks, and we in Ukraine has probably the same experiment running live under the fire right now. And what are we teaching Ukraine about the structure of defense industrial base that can withstand the shocks and the attacks and the problems?
Well, again, back to cluster manufacturing. So we have a program called RIVET. It stands for Recas Industrial Visibility and Execution Tracker. This is a PLM-based program that can capture today's government and or OEMs digital twins and the production processes, let's call it the need. And from the other side, we can filter out capabilities from other suppliers, workshops, and storages to create redundant manufacturing in the case of need to ramp up or to replace, for example, a destroyed factory. That company that are producing a product, say that you then had control of all the companies, or at least a major part of the companies within Ukraine, and you could filter out who has the ability to do different tempos within a production process, and you could directly filter out where you could send out requests to see, do you have the availability to add to your manufacturing right now, because we need to continue manufacturing the next day. Of course, that is perhaps a short time lapse, but it's a very quick way to create the visibility of the country's capability, because many times this is relation based. Which companies do you know? And this sets a short-sighted line on how to solve that issue.
We have witnessed exactly this situation in Ukraine when different producers get help from other manufacturers to be able to continue their production cycle after some attacks or some problems with supply. is it possible for somehow to replicate and to distribute the blueprints or some knowledges of production of the same product? If, for example, we have 200 UGV producers, or we have 1,000 drone producers in Ukraine, and each of them have to, invent the circle all over again, because they are so dispersed and they are very reliable, and they usually do not communicate with each other. But if we create this knowledge base for everyone to get for this basic, I don't know, mechanical process, or some manufacturing best practices, which can help everyone to be more efficient in a large scale, and that will be also the part of competition.
Yes, of course, it's possible to create and safeguard data, but you have to somehow also maintain that these different companies have their revenue stream, so they can stay alive and pay salaries and buy new parts and continue. So I think that is somewhat of the challenge, but creating that system, that is what Rivet is about.
It was a national system, right, on the governmental level?
No, it came back from Sweden had in the past that we had something that we called war companies. War companies were designated to take over production for military needs in regards of being under attack. But Sweden, being the friendly country, was strongly convinced that we would live in peace forever, not seeing disturbances in Europe as we see today. So we do have a need to recreate this, and our program with Rivet is a way of making it into a 2.0 solution of the old war companies. So how can you adapt to see where all the availabilities of production are in your country, and where are they geographically located? During this system, you could also allow yourself to find what is in storage. So perhaps you have some place in Kiev that could produce it, and you could have parts in Odessa or Lviv, and then you can jointly help each other. Then you are creating another way of increasing efficiency for the country and for the companies.
Right.
I was recently talking with the CEO of a UGV company outside of Ukraine, and the interesting thing there was that Ukraine has a number of weapons that were stockpiled that couldn't be used, but the development of this particular UGV meant that suddenly these could actually be used. So they could come out of stockpile, but you had to know they were there and how
Yeah.
many there are and all of these sorts of things, right? And suddenly this is a useful weapon, whereas previously just been sort of, this is not going to work.
And
So
that
yeah,
is a perfect example of how do you go away from relation-based information to data-stored information, where you can filter this out for a full country or for a full union or something like that.
great. Sweden and much of NATO allowed domestic production capacity to atrophy over decades of arms reduction, disarmament. Ukraine never had that luxury because there's been a lot of war. It wasn't 2022. It's very much 2014 that things really got rolling there. Is there an irony that a country that's fighting for the survival now has in some ways more practical manufacturing urgency knowledge than most NATO members?
Well, we are all impressed by the pace and the strength and the progress that Ukraine has done by necessity. And the necessity to survive and conquer, I guess that's the strongest urge and desire you can have to be effective. Uh, We have a lot to learn of the situation in Ukraine, and I think it's in the spotlight of all NATO countries to learn from Ukraine in this aspect.
I would also, from Ukrainian perspective, would love to mention that we have the problem with disarmament because after the Soviet Union, Ukraine was the third country in the world in terms of nuclear arsenal. We had more atomic bombs than France or Germany, for example, arms. It was planes, it was ships, it was tanks, it was armed vehicles. But the problem is that we didn't think about our sovereignty, and the government keep selling these weapons from 1991 to 2014, and we disarmed almost all full of our capacity and our weapons, right? And we were selling tanks and armed vehicles and everything, like to the left and to the right. And when we faced the war in 2014 with Russian aggression, we were shortage on this equipment. So we started rebuilding the whole ecosystem of arms production.
Finland, the UK, the US all have models that require a domestic service and maintenance capability for defense systems. If Ukraine is going to integrate more deeply with NATO's industrial base in the future, what standards should they be held to, and who should be setting them?
If I look out of a Swedish perspective, we have something that we call the ILS, and it's how to maintain in the best way equipment that it should live for many decades, perhaps. And the requirement levels to doing this is something that you afford to do in peacetime. Creating this, and this is not the situation Ukraine is in today. But if we were to look at the Ukrainian manufacturing and thinking of being in peacetime, where we've achieved victory, and you want to be producers out to Europe, then this is a whole different story in regards on how to deliver. It's not okay. Well, Dan, we spoke about a bit earlier. You said that sometimes you just have to get equipment out fast as possible and you try to scale up as quick as possible, and this has effects on quality. These are then points that are never allowed, and you're moving in a slower pace, and the quality checks are much higher, and all the documentation, it's I'd say it's almost dreadful how much it is. It's like delivering a car.
We also depends from our export in the future. Our economy will rely on the ability to get revenue from exporting our technology and military equipment, obviously. But right now, it seems for many companies and founders that focusing on the ongoing war is more important than future profit. So many of them just digging deep into producing as much as possible, as fast as possible, and to provide it to the soldiers. As Micael mentioned previously, that he met guys whom mission was just to save his fellow brothers of arms. And right now it's all over the country. Many of companies, yes, we have companies that are thriving for the profit, but many of them are mainly focused on how to survive, how to not lose the war, and how to win the war in any possible way.
Are there some small steps we can start doing now in terms of data capture and documentation and so on that could assist us later, that we won't have to suddenly scramble and make it very, very difficult to succeed in the future?
So you have said that the point isn't to build parallel industries, but to build redundancy through geographical distribution. We called it clustering, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so for Ukraine specifically, what does this resilient post-war industrial geography looks like, and how early should we be thinking about it? Should we start it already, like to prepare ourselves?
When you're going then global and you're gonna partnering up with others, or you're gonna need to talk with investors and so on, then you need to be able to be to withstand a due diligence. And doing the due diligence, once again, then you need something to view, and you need to have order on your data once again. I feel like a parrot just saying order on data, but it is essential. It's the one thing you do need. So if you're going to have investors from another country, or if you're going to start up and having somebody to believe in, you have to be able to show that you're in control. And when you do a due diligence, you do not want to find key personnel that the knowledge is hung up on, because since we no longer have slavery, people are free to move and go to another company. And if the value is that person, you have no value in your company.
Yes, exactly. And you also have to keep IP, right?
Yes, the IP, but I mean, this is the question. The IP, what is the IP? Is the IP in the person, or is the IP in the company? So how to build value in your company? This is what it's all about. Are you able to scale? That questions comes out when you want to go global. Or if you're producing for another country, they want to know what are your availabilities. And the way you can scale, that set the factors of the value of your company for what it can produce and deliver.
Let's talk about Recas for a moment. Your company. It's an engineering firm from Gothenburg in Sweden. I know you've won 2 very important awards to do with growth, speed of growth of your own enterprise in Sweden. It's not a traditional defense prime. Why should Ukrainian defense companies want to work with a company like yours to get to that next level of manufacturing capability, rather than the established primes or other large manufacturing entities or advisories?
Yeah, well, I think it's because Recas is not limited by heavy legacy structures or slow decision making. We're an agile industrial engineering company focused on rapid industrialization, scalability, and practical execution. Ukraine's defense industry is evolving extremely fast, and success today depends on the ability to adapt, integrate, and scale quickly. That fits us very well. We are already supporting global defense OEMs with product data management, engineering, and scaling of industrial capacity. By combining Swedish industrial engineering, automotive style production thinking, and a modern PLM driven development, I think we help turn ideas and prototypes into scalable manufacturing capability. Rather than competing with an established prime, we see ourselves as fast, flexible industrialization partner that can help accelerate the capability in the production together with the Ukrainian companies.
Maybe there is something else what surprised you in Kiev that you didn't expect it to see or to hear or to learn about.
Yes, I think what surprised me the most was in this stable time for Ukraine right now, how safe and how connected I could feel by such a friendly, decisive nation of people. That surprised me, and it just increases my eager to be some small part of supporting Ukraine towards victory.
When I meet the Ukrainians, is that, and I've met a lot, that they kind of embody very European, very modern European ways of living and thinking and creating, and aesthetics and art and all of these sorts of cultural aspects. But they also have some deep-seated values that we maybe used to have a bit more of in the rest of Europe, and that are sort of being shattered a little bit. They are fragmenting under the weight of capitalism, technologies and so on and so forth. Here you have a country that is fighting more or less in unity against a common enemy, and that strengthens a society. Right? And I think that's one of the things that I'd like to see as Ukraine gets even more central within Europe, that these values also start to filter across and to reinforce those values in the rest of Europe's society. Micael, this has been a mesmerizing conversation. And I think what stands out is, for me, is how consistently you brought the engineering reality back to the human stakes. You made that bridge between this life and death, and we need to do something about it. That's not something that you hear enough in defense manufacturing circles. So thanks for the time and perspectives you've shared with us today.
For our listeners, Recas is based in Sweden and run by our guest, Micael, and their work on Rufus and distributed manufacturing resilience is very much worth following. So we will put the links in the description. For all our listeners, we also encourage you to follow our pages in Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, whenever you see us. If you are interested into military technology and the modern situation on the Ukrainian fighting machine.
I'm Jonathan Winch from Cylinder Defense in Copenhagen.
And my name is Dan Kucherenko. I'm from Serhiy Prytula Charity Foundation in Kyiv, Ukraine. And we thank you, everyone who listened to us today. I hope that this episode sparked something for you. Share it with someone who needs to hear this.
And remember, if you're wondering how to best contribute to Ukraine and you want to be sure that none of your donation is spent on administration or salaries, then Serhiy Prytula Foundation is so transparent, effective, and accountable that we at Cylinder Defense selected them as our partner for all Ukraine activities.